Welcome back to Out of Home Insider, where you learn about digital out of home, ad tech, programmatic, the convergence of those three things. In case you missed last week's conversation, go back and check out that with Bill Harvey, media research legend. He tells us the story about how in the late 70s, they condensed the million words in the Oxford Unabridged Dictionary down to 265 driver tags and ultimately 15 cohorts that empirically determine outcomes. More than attention, it's emotion. What motivates us to take action. Check out that episode. Really insightful conversation with Bill. Looking forward to next week, we'll be meeting with Eric Tilbury. He's the Senior Director of Ad Ops, manages a team of programmatic lever pullers at Inuvo. We'll be chatting with Eric about his ideas of where digital out of home is going, how it fits into the overall media mix, programmatic trends. That's going to be a great episode with Eric. And a reminder that there are just now 3 weeks left until the Placer AI Discover event in New York City at Chelsea Pier. Go to theoohinsider.com. You're going to see across the top of the page a big banner. That's for a discount. There's a promo code. It's OOH Insider 70. You'll save 70% on registration. It's reasonably priced at $3.99 a ticket, but with promo code OOH Insider 70, you will save 70%. So go there, theoohinsider.com. Can't miss it. Today, Alvaro Villa. Al, VP of Biz Dev at FatTail. Al, welcome to the show. We're going to talk about direct advertising. We're going to talk about automation and kind of redefine some of the terms that get thrown around, but welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Let's start at the beginning. What is the big idea behind the problem that FatTail solves for?
Our North Star is that we want premium content to win. All of our clients are premium advertisers. They're at the upper right-hand quadrant. And the reality is that they provide the product that is the most valuable, that is the content. And so the way that you get premium content to win is you enable them to make money. So what we do is we streamline that entire process for them. The entire advertising process, we have software that helps solve for that helps increase yield, helps increase revenue.
Easy enough. Straightforward. Thank you for that. GSTV, WebMD, Financial Times, some of those premium publishers that FatTail works with. How do you, I guess, from a maybe personal perspective, maybe from a FatTail perspective, how do you define what premium is?
Premium advertisers are brand safe and highly sought after inventory. Whether that be in the digital sphere, whether that be at an event, whether that be in digital out of home. It is things that buyers want to buy with an inherent comfort and brand safety.
It's good. That's good. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Things that people want to buy, not just things I could sell them, but the things that they want to buy, the places that brands want to show up. And we think about it oftentimes as large format screens in our living rooms, but for in the real world, we think about it as context, as moments. How do you start to think about the role of automation in today's very direct kind of ad sales landscape? How do you think about that?
We see automation as super important. One of the things that we've found interesting, as I mentioned before, our publishers sit at the upper right-hand quadrant. They are kind of the most premium of the premium. And we did a study internally in terms of where their revenue was coming from. And what we found was, even though they're selling about 80% direct in terms of inventory and 20% programmatic, 95% of the revenue that they're seeing come in is still coming in from direct advertising. And so what that tells us is interesting, right? That they're making the most money from direct, but that is also still the most friction-filled process. And so solving that is what's going to bring the biggest value to these publishers, because again, there's a lot of that goes on in a direct advertising model that is still has a ton of friction. And so our goal is to solve that and to make direct advertising as easy as it is today with programmatic, because that's one of the big advantages of programmatic, right? That it's much easier to execute than direct advertising today.
Can we define what programmatic is, particularly for the digital out of home audience? The industry kind of uses programmatic as this blanket word to encompass a lot of different meanings. Can you define what programmatic is to the digital ad sales ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's an automation of one or multiple parts of the execution path for the ad to run. In terms of our publishers, we at FatTail facilitate the more premium side of programmatic. So programmatic guaranteed, which is very much like a direct sale, except for the operations and kind of the billing are automated on the back end. Same thing for preferred deals. Private auctions, again, similar thing where you still have like a sales element to all of these things, but the execution and the operations are handled by systems in an automated way. And so I think that automation and programmatic kind of really should belong together. And that's the thing. What we seek to do is to blur the lines in what today is considered the direct advertising by automating it to such a degree that it is not, there won't be a meaningful difference between it and what we consider programmatic today.
It almost seems we had recently released a kind of a research episode around the programmatic trends in digital out of home. And there was a really important footnote in one of the charts that we shared, which was the amount of money trafficked via automation. And that was the specific call out for what is programmatic. It would seem like automation really is the job to be done. Automation is really the thing that we want to do to be more efficient, to deliver more of our working media as automated as possible. Why do you think that bifurcation exists? Why is that so conflicted?
I think it's just history. People have, hard time letting go of labels. But I agree with you that automation is 100% the job to be done. And I also think it's important, though, that we automate in a way that still enables human creativity. The reason I think that 95% revenue number exists is indirect sales. You not only have the relationship of the AE, but you also have a creativity in terms of the product that can be offered that is just too hard to put into a systemic programmatic environment where you're trying to generalize things so that you can buy at scale is what most of these platforms are doing. Whereas if I'm, doing a takeover or having some totally custom sale for, whether it be digital or out of home or whatever, that's something that an AE and his team can come up with, pitch to the client. And now you have this like super premium white glove offering that's going to have a better return for the buyer. But it's just too hard to do, in the current programmatic, environment as it exists today. And so the more that we can push automation, the more that we get all of the ease of programmatic, which is a good thing. And it is the way that people, are going and want to go. But now we're also able to introduce the creativity that exists in direct sales today so that you have a best of both worlds scenario. You have, you're able to sell advertising at higher CPMs because one of the downsides as a programmatic, especially the open auction, is that in a lot of cases, unless you're that 1 or 2% that can do it super effectively, it tends to be a race to the bottom in terms of your CPMs. Yeah. It cannibalizes your own inventory because it commoditizes it. And so the more that we can automate and keep what is premium, the more that publishers will flourish, and at the same time kind of reducing that friction that today exists, so prominently in direct sales.
And it's that race to the bottom that creates that remnant kind of branding around some of the inventory, which is in direct conflict to being seen as a premium. So when you're thinking, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, not only that, but you also have like from the buyer's perspective, that race to the bottom can be problematic for them as well, because especially in today's landscape where you have the privacy, the cookies are going away, like again, maybe less of an issue for out of home, but there's
that's a windfall
this
for us.
On brand. Right, exactly. I mean, like this focus on brand safety, being able to say, this is a safe place to advertise as opposed to like, is it a safe place? Because if I'm, incorporating across N number of execution paths, I need to have a team that's making sure that we're not showing up in the wrong place.
Yeah.
If I'm able to easily buy in a place and with a publisher that I know is going to be brand safe for me, that saves me, a whole lot of headaches.
Absolutely. Makes sense. So when you look at the challenges that publishers face with direct sales, how do you start to prioritize which pain points to address first? Obviously, we could build sexy, fun stuff like real-time bidding capabilities, but we've got to solve business problems first. How do you prioritize that?
We take a pretty pragmatic approach, frankly. It's listening to our publishers. We talk to them pretty often, and our product teams have regular check-ins, and we let them tell us what hurts the most. And that, by the way, is the genesis of how we built two of our most recent products, one of which is called AdBook Portal. And what the portal is an evolving product that does a lot of things, but originally what it meant to solve for was creative chasing and approval, et cetera. That's too painful. It's all in emails. Help us automate that. It is a gigantic friction point for us for direct sales. With programmatic, again, it takes care of some of that. And so this was a big friction point. Also, payment processing has too much friction as well. help us with that. And so we started to build this product based off feedback that we got from the market. And recently we've added our AI sales assistant to that portal product, which is solving another problem, which is, hey, when an AE is talking to a client, how can we get a proposal in front of that client that is a better proposal and do so more quickly than what happens today? Because usually there's a conversation that happens internally. The AE talks to usually somebody like a sales planner. They put together a plan. There's a back and forth, and it takes sometimes days to get to the client. The AI sales assistant uses the data that exists, uses that automation that we mentioned, and enables the AE to say, here's my client, here are some of the parameters that I care about, suggest to me immediate plan. It is as easy as programmatic, and you don't have a real-time bid. You have a guaranteed deal, which again, as a buyer, all things being equal, if you can guarantee the amount of inventory that you're buying in a brand safe place, in a premium place, you would prefer that than hoping for the best, on an auction.
Something that you said in there kind of just made me realize that programmatic, it almost seems like programmatic emerges as a way to transact, to avoid the friction of direct sales.
Yes.
But ultimately, now that we've done it for a decade, we realize it's not the most efficient. It's not the most effective. We do need to have those direct relationships. We like the automation that programmatic has given us. So how do we have our cake and eat it too? So solving these problems is really, it's not just skating to the puck. It's what's happening right now today. I would love to hear more about how you worked with GSTV. How did GSTV come to working with FatTail, and what sort of problems did you solve for them?
So they came to us with a very unique problem, which is the way that they sell. It's something that I think is going to resonate with a lot of your listeners, because the digital out-of-home space has an inventory, querying and inventory availability challenge that is, I think, unique versus like the broader digital space. And so with them, they have a bunch of gas stations and they sell on an impression basis, but the gas stations all run on a loop. And so once you are on a gas station, you run on that loop and you have all of those impressions. So figuring out how much inventory do I have based off of like all of the parameters that I'm putting in, location, all that stuff, was a real challenge. And they would basically take data from Vistar, their execution ad server, for lack of a better term, CMS. And then they also had internal metrics that they would massage, that they would hold elsewhere. And we needed to marry those two things together and be able to present them an inventory availability answer that they were just kind of having to do manually over and over again. So it was a huge challenge, because you'd have these deals, you'd have to figure out, how much inventory do we have? Because you weren't sure, oftentimes you have to oversell, and now you're losing money because you could be being more efficient and selling to somebody else those impressions that you're essentially over committing, so that you don't get in an under delivery situation. And so we built an integration to their proprietary system to get both availability as well as forecast numbers. And then we also built some automation tools that enable them to basically say, here's the stuff that I care about. Build me a list of of gas stations to this budget. Because it's basically, imagine having thousands of IDs and saying, okay, well, I only need a million impressions. The universe is 5 million. Please build me a budget, but do so that you're evenly distributing DMAs.
Sure.
So you're keeping like all the stuff that a human
would do. A lot
of
logic involved with that.
All of the logic, putting that automation in so that the seller can now be creative and be like, I can get more deals out. I know what it is I want. But today, before this, what they were doing is having to do all this stuff in Excel. And so that's
Incredible
tough because but the thing is that they have such a unique type of inventory. That waste of time was what made them special. The fact that I can do things and say, I want to be, X radius around a circle K, for example. That is the stuff that really makes, exactly. And by the way, I think that's what makes digital out of home super powerful, because you have locality in addition to the inventory itself. Like if I want to buy a coffee and I'm near a Starbucks, seeing an ad for Starbucks is going to be more effective than I look at it right here on my computer screen as we're talking.
Absolutely. And that seems like the opportunity for it's the Logic's case, right? There's so much CPG spending on CTV. How can digital out of home capture a fragment of that? Well, it comes by creating brand safe environments that brands want to be on. How do you create brand safe environments brands want to be on? You have to overcome this remnant connotation that's been kind of reserved and designated for digital out of home. Since we've failed to define some of these things to the market, they're being defined back to us. It's really interesting to hear how you've not just solved this for online publishers, but now with GSTV. What's the timeline on a project like that from a first conversation to deployment, kinks ironed out? Is that like, it seems like there's a lot involved there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the sales process was long because it took a long time for us to even understand kind of all the nuances and the challenges. With them, I think it was, again, getting the software that we have in our standard ad book software. That's something that can be done typically, depending on the publisher size, anywhere from 2 to 6 months. And that usually depends on the publisher more than it does frankly on us, because understanding your business and all that discovery is a huge part of what we do because our software is so configurable. Like, we are meant to be able to handle a lot of edge cases because frankly, what we find is the more workarounds you have, the more money you're losing. Like those edge cases are what brings the friction. So in a system like ours, and with publishers, there's always these edge cases of like, well, we sell this 80% of the time this way, but this one advertiser wants to buy in a very unique way. Being able to handle that as a standard part of the workflow and a standard part of the process, as opposed to like, let's take this offline and we'll handle this separately. The more let's take this offline and workarounds that you put into place, the less streamlined you are. And that's just going to introduce friction and potential errors. And so being able to handle those complex scenarios is a big part of what we do.
That's a great red flag. Let's take this offline. I think that's something everyone listening to this episode is nodding their head saying, yeah, I've definitely been in more of those conversations than I care to recount. What other red flags are there that this could be a good solve?
Yeah. So the other thing that I will say with them is integrations. With digital out of home, I think you're going to need, there is a lot of non-standard stuff out there. So you're going to need to have a partner that is willing to integrate to external systems that might not be the norm. In the digital space, it's a little different. You have like your primary ad servers that kind of everyone knows and integrates to. In the digital out of home space, because it is so unique, trying to find the integrations and the efficiencies there is going to be super important to getting the most value.
What do you think those integrations should be? Is there a priority list, not necessarily companies, but considerations perhaps?
I would say integration to anything that your execution path. So something, let's say in the case of GSTV, we're building an integration to Vistar so that you can send the data to the screen so that they serve in the way that you want them to serve. As I mentioned before with GSTV, also integration to inventory. How are you managing inventory? Where does that live? Yeah. Is there anything special about it? Like, is it just a pure impression play, or are you selling it are you selling sponsorships? We have a lot of inventory capabilities within the system natively, but like oftentimes the source of truth exists elsewhere. So being able to know and understand what that is and how are we tracking that? Also, like, how are you selling against that? Again, is it just impressions? Are you selling it based on a metric that kind of falls outside the norm, that is unique to you as a digital out-of-home publisher that someone else may not have? Like, that's one of the superpowers that out-of-home has, is that they're going to have metrics that fall outside of the norm for, let's say, a regular digital publisher. And so being able to embrace that and to be able to track that, I think, is going to be super important. I also wanted to go back a little bit to something you said about the kind of the norms of the advertising space being forced on digital out of home and what we can do around it. I think they need to embrace the creativity that is inherent to the direct sales process, because they have ways of packaging up their inventory and ways of selling that you will not be able to compete if you are your standard digital publisher, because you don't have that locality. And so you need to embrace the creativity, because it is such a unique set of inventory that you should get more money for it, as opposed to just kind of going along to get along and having a commoditization of your inventory that frankly is much more valuable than what commoditized product will allow you to get.
Based on what you see, the conversations that you have, the obviously the great publishers that you work with, do you think digital out of home publishers should be, and I realize this question is relative to scale and some other criteria, but should they be making their case to brands? Is it to agencies, to out-of-home specialists? Is it to DSPs? It seems like as an industry, there isn't necessarily always clear direction on who should we be selling to. Do you have a take on that?
I mean, I'll just say this, that our biggest, most successful publishers still get the lion's share of their revenue directly. And so I would say making the case to agencies is probably the best way to go, but in an easy way. The thing about the DSP is again, you're dealing with, some commoditization there. Not to say you shouldn't do it. Like, again, all of our publishers have a direct sales strategy and a programmatic strategy, and there's a place for both. We frankly just see it as an execution path. But it's hard to beat a direct relationship with the people who have the money. And if you can tell a compelling story as to why your inventory is so much more valuable and like show metrics of success that they can't get in another place, you're going to be a lot more effective than just having your inventory as one of many inside of a DSP, in my opinion.
Al, we're going to come back. We're going to talk about the relationship and some of the conflict of direct sales versus programmatic transactions, programmatic trading. But first, before we break for a little bit of news in that piece of the conversation, give folks the Latin long. Where do they learn more about FatTail? Where do they connect with you?
Yeah, FatTail.com, our website. You can reach out to just go there. All the about us stuff is there, and would love to hear from you guys.
Great. We will make sure to link to all that. We'll link to your personal LinkedIn. I'm sure folks would like to connect with you. We'll make sure that that's all in the show notes below, and we'll be right back with a little bit of news. Are you ready to unlock the long tail? If you're a digital out-of-home publisher and you're ready to unlock the long tail, there's a lot of moving pieces that come with it. Today's conversation being one of them. So I want to invite you to visit sellmoredooh.com. That's sellmoredooh.com so we can explore what solutions might make sense for you. A couple weeks ago, we met with Jonathan Maffei from Streamer AI. They create TV-ready commercials using the power of generative AI, so you never have to step over an incremental dollar of revenue because the brand or the agency didn't have the right creative. Today, we're meeting with Al from FatTail and talking all about end-to-end ad ops. So if these topics are starting to resonate with you and you want to action on them so that you have a roadmap for 2025 and beyond, visit sellmoredooh.com, schedule time with me, and we'll get started this week. Now, back to the show. Today's news coming out of eMarketer. It was a piece titled Guide to Programmatic Advertising Channels, Ad Sales, Service Models, and Players, which feels particularly relevant to today's conversation. Did you know that from 2013 to 2024, programmatic ad spend exploded on mobile and expanded obviously into CTV? Over that same time period, U.S. programmatic digital display ad spend increased from just under $5 billion to $157 billion. Crazy. So what is programmatic? We talked about it earlier, but a refresher: programmatic refers to any ad that is transacted or fulfilled via automation, which means technology takes on the decision-making in the ad serving process. And what isn't programmatic advertising? Any direct sold inventory with fixed pricing and a predetermined limited campaign window. It's not programmatic. Al, obviously FatTail is solving for these really hard to solve problems. But how do you think about the relationship between the account executive, the brands, the buyers? It's starting to seem like there's a conflict. I'm hearing it more from digital out-of-home account executives that, hey, my brands, my agencies, they're buying me programmatically, but I'm not getting paid for it. What do you think about that?
So this, I think, speaks a lot to what we were talking about earlier, where the goal ought to be, let's enable human creativity. And it's one of those things that I think publishers, do so at their own peril, is ignoring the relationships that account executives have with the brands and with the agencies. At the end of the day, sales is a relationship thing. We ought not to care about the execution path. And whether that means we change the comp structure for salespeople, that could be a path. But making the automation make the process easier is what we want, and it is a noble goal. But you can't do that at the expense of losing the relationship with the salesperson, because you will inevitably commoditize your inventory and get less money overall.
And at the end of the day, it's a follow the incentive structure kind of game. If you take away the cheddar for the AE, they're going to go find the cheese, right? Who moved my cheese? I'm going to go find my cheese. Someone else is going to put out a big, juicy, stinky block of Parmesan or cheddar.
And again, the relationships, they'll take those relationships with them. At the end of the day, a publisher should care about the easy execution of the deal, but having people bring you deals and bring relationships and bring in that revenue will never stop being valuable, especially as we alluded to before with the creativity aspect. Because if you now automate, let's say direct sales like we were talking about before, now you allow these AEs to be creative, like, here, let me put together a package for you that no one's going to be able to put together. And
100%.
we can execute on it easily, right? As opposed to, let me go into a DSP, put my audiences. Again, that's still valuable, but you're not going to get that white glove, treatment. And especially in the digital out-of-home space, where you do have limited inventory compared to the walled gardens like a Google, Facebook that can just throw tens of millions of impressions at somebody for nothing. You have to go on experience and quality and white glove. Like, the reason a brand wants to be here is because you are going to have a better result with us. Therefore, we need to be more creative. And therefore, you need human creativity. The AE becomes paramount in that. We just need to make their job simpler so that in the case of a GSTV, they're not spending time in spreadsheets figuring out what it is that they can sell. They're going off and finding new ways to sell in a way that only a human can do.
That's good. And you drew it out earlier, that direct versus programmatic, having sales strategies for the different methods of transacting. You said in the lead up before we pressed record that you have to commoditize your inventory to be available at scale, but that lives in conflict with cool, curated, creative. I think that that's such a great way to think about this, is exactly that. Automation means that your best people can do their highest and best work. Let them focus on the relationship.
Yep. Let the machines do what the machines are good at doing, and let people do what they're good at doing, which is being creative and thinking outside the box.
Great. Al, I can't thank you enough. This has been a really important conversation in the bigger conversation that we're having. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. If you found this episode to be helpful, please share it with someone who could benefit. As always, make sure to smash that subscribe button, and we'll see you all next time.